So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hi, my name is James Ide, and I'm here to talk to you today about how React Native is actually ready for prime time and how that pertains to teams and technologies. So for a little bit of context, I'd like to tell you a bit about myself. I'm a core contributor to React Native with about 150 commits to GitHub, and I help with releases every now and then. By trade, I'm a software developer, and specifically I'm interested in libraries and systems for product development. I gave up frameworks years ago. My industry experience includes working at Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and most recently, Exponent. And I was really lucky to see the engineering org in each of these companies. And this shaped my own opinions on engineering teams, and this is what I want to talk to you today about. The other thing about my industry experience is that for most of my career, I've done web development, probably like many of you in this room here today. And it was only around about 2.5 years ago that I shifted my focus to mobile. And I'm going to talk about one reason for that change. So in the past few years, we've seen some very significant changes in technology, and I want to talk about two of those changes. The first and most significant is mobile. Think about the next billion computers. Not a million, that's not cool, 1 billion computers. Most of those computers are going to be mobile devices. And for many businesses, mobile revenue streams are growing faster than their desktop ones. In fact, some multi-billion-dollar businesses make more money from mobile than desktop, so mobile. The second change I want to talk to you about is React Native. On a technological level alone, React Native makes several profound leaps forward, and it makes these leaps together all at once. React Native is challenging conventional wisdom on all cylinders. But React Native's effect extends way beyond the code. React Native will change the way engineering teams are organized. So today, let's talk about teams and technology. First, I want to talk about React Native as a technology. Some of you don't need convincing that it's an awesome technology, and you know this. For the rest of you, let me tell you why React Native is awesome, by starting off with how empowering it is. Most of you watching this talk are web developers today. So I want to begin by contrasting React Native with the DOM. React Native has a much higher ceiling. And by this, I mean you can go further with React Native than you can with HTML-centric technologies. For example, want to embed an Apple or Google map arbitrarily in the middle of your view hierarchy? You can do that with React Native. Or a camera or an inline video player in the middle of your view hierarchy? Again, very easy to do with React Native. And you can do all of this today with React Native and ship it next week to all of your users. Part of what enables this is React Native's very extensible runtime. The ability to add native capabilities to the React Native runtime is very powerful. Who remembers border radius not being in every browser or Flexbox missing? We had to wait for spec committees to agree upon a standard, then for browser vendors to implement it, and finally for users to upgrade their browsers to the latest versions with all of those features. And after a couple years, finally we could reliably use Flexbox. With React Native, you can fork the layout system today and ship that right away to your users. Again, in 1 week, all of your users on your mobile app can be using your extensions to the React Native runtime. Mobile first. So React Native was designed from day one for mobile devices. React Native apps just feel better. It's a subjective thing. At Exponent, we talk about mouthfeel. How an app, the experience on a phone just can feel really great. And we found that React Native apps tend to feel great out of the box. They're more accommodating to touches and gestures. React Native components feel very responsive by default. But if you take a look at the most used mobile apps, most of them aren't built with the DOM. They're built with native technologies. So let's compare React Native with the Android and iOS native SDKs. App development is great with React Native. Obviously, it's cross-platform. You don't get this with iOS generally, and you don't get this with Android. There's a very fast feedback loop. So the window of time from editing your code to seeing its effects significantly shorter than it has been with native toolkits. Edit your code, boom, your app reloads its JavaScript. And lastly, this is huge, continuous deployment. This totally changes how you think about your development process. JavaScript deployment is much faster and less disruptive than publishing your app to the App Store. Yesterday, we heard about code push, and we're fans of this idea at Exponent as well. And continuous deployment changes how people work. With continuous deployment, as a developer or a PM, you worry a lot less about getting your code in for the next release because you're always releasing. Mobile performance. So React Native is inherently multi-threaded, and this is critical for mobile. In fact, React Native uses 3 threads primarily: the JS thread, a shadow thread, and the native UI thread. And interestingly, it separates the notion of the UI thread from the main thread. In React Native, the main thread runs all your application JavaScript, and the UI thread runs all the UI native views that it would in a traditional iOS or Android app. This is important because mobile processors aren't getting that much faster. This equation here, which you don't need to understand the specifics of, but it relates power consumption, that's P, to voltage and frequency, V and F on the right. And generally with CPUs, if you want to increase the frequency, you have to increase the voltage as well. If you increase the voltage, there's that squared term. So the power increases quadratically. So we can make our mobile processors faster by increasing the frequency, but then we drain our batteries and we increase heat output on phones. So instead, what hardware manufacturers have been doing is adding more cores. So being multi-threaded is great for React Native. And React Native is open source, and this is fantastic. It's open source in 2 ways: in a way where you can read the code, but also contribute back to it. You can't do this with iOS's UI kit at all. The code is completely closed source. And on Android, you can read the code, but it's hard to contribute back into mainstream Android. React Native's development is guided, and by this I mean the core contributors of React Native are actually using it in their own production apps that are important to their companies. This is huge. For example, at Exponent, we noticed our JavaScript animations sometimes stuttered a little bit. And so we worked together with Christoph Magera, who's another core contributor, to build stutter-free, off-threaded native animations. And we shaped that API and feature set based on real use cases, like an image gallery and a new navigation component coming to React Native that Eric Vicente shared with us yesterday. So if you couldn't tell, I believe React Native is a total game changer. But there's a big question in the room. You want to maybe use React Native, and so you're thinking about choosing it. And I believe choosing React Native is one of the most important technical decisions you will make. But that question is React Native ready for production? And I want to change this question up a little bit because different people have different views on what production ready means. So my definition for this is it possible to build solid, high-quality mobile apps using React Native? And the answer is yes. And I want to show you why we believe this at Exponent. First, just a little context. So I work on this product called Exponent, and it's a mobile app that lets you get and use things that people have made with React Native. With Exponent, you build things with pure JavaScript, publish your code to our servers, and then anyone with Exponent can use the thing that you built. If this interests you, we have a website, exponentjs.com, and you can learn more. And one thing I'd like to highlight is that the roadmap of Exponent is guided by real use cases. We want to understand the needs of developers, and we believe the best way for us to do that is to build real apps on Exponent, real apps that are high quality and going out to production. And I'd like to share 2 of these with you today. The first is called Brighten. And Brighten is an app that lets you make someone's day with a compliment. This is Austin, and I'd like to tell you about Austin's story. A few years ago, Austin's friend passed away in an accident. And in their grieving, his friends began sharing positive memories. And Austin wished his friend could have seen the outpouring of kind and heartfelt messages. Austin set up a compliment box, and people would anonymously write something nice about a friend and drop it in the box. People appreciated not just reading notes about them, but also writing the notes as well. Austin turned the compliment box into an iPhone app, and people started using it to brighten someone's day. But only some of their friends could use it. Remember, one of the problems with native technologies is that they generally work only on one platform. Brighten was for iPhone only, and we wanted to fix that. So we made a version of Brighten for Exponent. It's all written in pure JavaScript, and here's a screen recording of it running on a Nexus 5X. We've got a native feed, infinite feed. It's got variable height stories inside of it. You tap on profile icons. Screens pop up from the bottom, like you'd expect from a mobile app. Slide back down. Really nice. This is what users expect from mobile. We've got a contacts list. This is scrolling at 60 FPS. It's all React Native. Zero scroll jank. This is production, high-quality mobile experiences. You can jump between the sections, too. You got a scrubber on the side. So that's Brighten. I'd like to tell you about the second app, which is called the List app. On the right-hand side, we have BJ Novak, who is an actor, producer, writer, and was once a temp at a paper company, even. One thing BJ did was keep a lot of lists on his phone. His favorite restaurants, movies he wanted to watch. And he wanted to see his friends' lists like this, too. So to bring his idea to a bigger audience, BJ started looking into making an app about lists. And along the way, he was introduced to Dev Flaherty, who had helped lead user experience at fab.com and had the background to bring the app to fruition. So they built it for iPhone. And the attention to detail in their iPhone app is great. Dev especially cares very deeply about the user experience. And the List app is very high quality, and it's really well built, and it set a high bar for its Android version. But again, it was iPhone only, and we wanted to fix that. So we made a version of the List app for Exponent. Pure JavaScript, and it taught us what we needed to improve about Exponent in order to build a complex app. If we could build List app, we could build a lot of other apps, and we weren't going to hit a ceiling. We've got an infinite feed with photos. Scroll down. We can tap into one of these lists. There's an image gallery. Zoom was a native animation that I mentioned earlier that we built for Exponent. Android back button does what users expect. There's a tab bar, lets you switch between sections. This is not a demo. This is a complete production quality app. Thank you. So I want to shed some light on this. How did we take React Native all the way to production, to this level? By this, I don't mean simply publishing an app. I mean creating apps with the quality and complexity that people expect from mobile apps, regardless of the technology used to make them. Our users don't give us a free pass just because we're using a new technology. And one thing we learned is that React Native is only part of the story for success. And the other part was our team. I was really lucky to be working with some excellent people on Exponent and the React Native versions of Brighten and the List app. In yesterday's keynote, Nick Schrock described the characteristics of future mobile engineering teams. And so for the rest of this talk, I want to share with you the lessons we learned from the implementation, the execution of assembling an engineering team with expertise in React Native. Let's start with some of the personal qualities that we look for in an engineer that we found to be important. It is so key that your team members are open to React Native. This is really, really important because React Native is a new technology and it does things differently than HTML or native iOS and Android. At the same time, your team should be choosing React Native because they see its potential and not to shy away from learning native development. Because there's a certain quality of being unafraid to look under the hood. And this is so important with React Native. You want to be taking initiative. React Native covers a lot of surface area because mobile APIs are huge. Understand how React Native works. You will need to write custom components that work well with the architecture of React Native. and you'll need to diagnose performance issues at several levels of the client-side stack. You want people who can dive in and diagnose those issues or build high-quality components. In fact, one of the best pieces of engineering advice I've received is the code is the documentation. This is especially true with React Native for several reasons, and that mindset has served us very well. Sometimes you'll need to fork and modify React Native. We do it all the time at Exponent. In the React Native roadmap, it may differ from your own needs. So by being proactive and able to address your own needs, you can take fate into your own hands instead of waiting for someone else to implement features or fix bugs for you. We also learned that experience with mobile or games is quite helpful. Games are interesting because of their tight resource constraints and emphasis on animations. They share some similarities with mobile. For example, reusing views is a common technique in game development and high-performance React components. But there was one thing that we found wasn't so important, and that was actually experience with React. People can learn React so quickly. So our lesson that we learned was success with React Native came from hustler mindset, not experience with React. With React Native, it's really valuable to understand mobile development. For many years myself, I did mostly web development, and it took me at least a year to become capable at mobile. The iOS and Android SDKs are ginormous, and for UIs alone, they each have their own system for views, gestures, rendering. The way screens are organized into view controllers and activities is different on each. They have different life cycles, adding even more complexity because you have to think about when your code is going to run. And of course, on mobile, some features are very easy to build with the native SDKs, and some features are very hard. So understanding those trade-offs, you get that from mobile experience. You have to be doing native mobile programming to understand, do I pursue building a certain feature with React Native, or do I just avoid building this feature at all on mobile because I just know the native capabilities aren't there? It calibrates your expectations. Similarly, mobile experience helps you critically reason about your app's UX and design. For example, a mobile developer is keenly in tune with the gesture handling that users expect. At Exponent, one feature we added to React Native is called hit test slot factor. This is a way to increase the hit boxes of buttons on the screen so that a user can comfortably tap them with their fingers without the precision of a mouse. This is something that you don't learn if you're doing only web development, specifically desktop web development. So understanding what the native platforms do is super helpful when developing apps with React Native. If you have mobile experience yourself, we want those of you excited about it and who believe in React Native to contribute back to the technology and push it forward. And if you don't have that experience, that's okay. But I believe you'll be most successful if you work with someone who does. They'll bring a lot of wisdom to the table. So our finding was that experience with mobile was more important than experience with web. Next, I want to shift to talking about teams. We talked about individuals, but now teams. At Exponent, people are responsible for work across both platforms. And lines of ownership are drawn between product features and APIs and not OSs. For example, one of our engineers, Brent, he built our image gallery for both Android and iOS. One person, both platforms. And at a product level, this meant that Brent was the owner of the image gallery, and he controlled the whole user experience. He made decisions about the design and how it should integrate. He chose how the API should look. He had agency to make whatever changes he saw fit. And we apply this to mobile APIs and infrastructure as well. Consider push notifications. There are slight differences in capabilities across Android and iOS. And by having one person take ownership of push notifications, we make it more likely that we'll create a consistent API across platforms. And as a cherry on top, since we use Node.js on the server, our engineers can work across stacks and up and down stacks. We want our product features, UI components, APIs to be coherent. And it's much easier to achieve that when one person is responsible for a given feature's vision. This is primarily for new teams. If you have an existing org that is divided into iOS and Android subdivisions, you can't make this change overnight. This is partly due to people reasons and partly due to technical ones. It will take time to build your cross-platform infrastructure and incrementally migrate your apps to a point where a reorg makes sense. So our lesson was that drawing lines of ownership between features instead of technologies encourages coherence across the platforms. And here we are. Up until now, we've heard of full-stack engineers who work at various levels of your software stack. I'd like to introduce the term cross-stack engineer. A cross-stack engineer is someone who works across stacks at the same level, notably Android and iOS. They have cross-platform responsibilities. One of the biggest benefits of having a cross-stack engineering team is organizational liquidity. And by this, I mean, how easy is it for people to switch responsibilities to satisfy their own interests and the needs of the team? And also, how easy is it for a company to reorganize its teams as needed? We found it's much easier for someone to go from implementing a newsfeed to an image gallery than it is to go from Android to iOS or vice versa. And one of the downstream effects of cross-stack engineering is that people can more easily relate to each other about technical matters. And this fosters a certain empathy, which is really nice. Of course, cross-stack engineering is challenging because the scope of the underlying mobile platforms is huge. And so my recommendation to you engineers watching this talk is to start with pure JS. You could try using Exponent, then gradually work your way out to both platforms. And trust me, at first, you will learn a lot. And with that, again, the hustler mindset is so important. You have to want to do this. And you want to work with people who are also go-getters themselves. With React Native, cross-stack engineering is this new opportunity that is blossoming. It makes so much more sense for engineers to work across stacks with React Native. This is new on mobile. This is a new era. So React Native is a really special technology, and its influence extends beyond our code bases. React Native improves the way we work as mobile developers. React Native is changing the way we organize engineering teams. And what's so exciting is that this tremendous opportunity is here today. React Native is ready for prime time, and all of us get to be the star. Thank you.